Hi everyone, Paul Stankista here, candidate for Pennsylvania State Senate. I was canvassing in Millvale today, and the subject that kept coming up over and over was public transit. Now, it's no secret that in Pennsylvania, and particularly here in Allegheny County, we are officially in crisis mode when it comes to public transit. PRT is facing a $100 million annual budget deficit, causing them last year to announce that they would be slashing services essentially in half, eliminating dozens of bus routes, and imposing a years-long wage freeze on the men and women who would be providing the services that we have left. And we only averted that disaster because the state ordered us to raid our own capital budget to fill this hole in our operational budget. But of course, this is no solution at all. Not only is that capital budget money going to run out next year and put us right back where we were, but that money was supposed to be used to invest in the physical infrastructure, the capital of our system, which we also desperately need. PRT has 55 vehicles that date all the way back to 1985, obviously well beyond their designed useful life. Now, in Millvale in particular, residents were describing how even at the current service levels, pre-slash, it simply isn't enough. Because there are several roads and bridges in Millvale that are so old and run down that PRT buses can't even safely go over them, forcing the buses to go all the way around Millvale, really posing a problem to the residents, particularly our older neighbors and those with mobility issues. So this felt like a good time to look back at how our legislature dug us into this hole and what can we do to now climb our way out of it. So, in 2007, our state was facing multiple different transportation crises at once. Pennsylvania's highways, bridges, and public transit systems were all underfunded, and our state leaders just didn't know what to do. And so they passed a law called Act 44 of 2007, which required the PA Turnpike to send $450 million annually to PennDOT to pay for highways, bridges, and public transit systems. But there were a couple problems with this plan. First of all, $450 million was not nearly enough to pay for all three of those priorities. And second of all, the PA Turnpike did not have that money and was forced to go into devastating debt to make those annual payments. And you'll notice if you spend enough time looking at Pennsylvania's finances like I have, that this is a really common theme. Our state leaders are constantly claiming to fund one priority when they're really just stealing from another, playing this elaborate shell game, shifting money around, putting out one fire over there but starting another over here. And at the end of it all, everything is on fire and nothing is funded. And that is exactly the situation we found ourselves in 2013, when our public transit systems were still going bankrupt and our PA Turnpike was now spiraling into debt. And so our state leaders passed another law called Act 89 of 2013, which still required the PA Turnpike to send $450 million annually to PennDOT. But now it was only on the hook for 10 years of those payments, and all of that money would go directly to public transit. But again, you'll notice this didn't solve the problems. The PA Turnpike still had to dig deeper and deeper into debt to make those 10 years of payments. And now there was zero money for our state's highways and bridges. And over a decade later, we're really seeing the results of that. Our public infrastructure is crumbling beneath our feet. Many of our bridges are quite literally not safe to drive on anymore. And it's a direct result of these two laws. And by the way, the PA Turnpike is still $16 billion in debt because of these two laws. But fine, at least public transit had 10 years of funding, but only 10 years. And in 2022, it was set to run out. And so our state leaders had a timer. You have 10 years, come up with a new solution to fund all these priorities. But 10 years came and went, and our state leaders did nothing. They passed no new law, no new funding, no new solution. And in 2022, our transit systems were only able to survive by kicking the can down the road using federal COVID relief funding. And that brings us to last year, when these devastating cuts were announced. And all of this is really why it was so frustrating last year to see our state leaders, including the incumbent in the seat that I'm currently running for, Senator Wayne Fontana, act surprised, shocked even. What do you mean you ran out of funding? We gave you public transit funding in Act 89. No, you did not. You explicitly wrote the law to run out of money after 10 years, and you knew it. You knew you had 10 years to come up with something, and you did nothing. Okay, that's how we got into this mess. But how do we fix it? And the obvious solution is to fund public transit. It's really pretty simple. And we can't keep playing this shell game where we move money from here to there. We need a new source of revenue as a state. And one particular solution that really makes a lot of sense is to extend our state's sales tax to ride-sharing companies like Uber and Lyft. Because right now, those companies don't pay sales tax, unlike most corporations in the state. And actually last year, during the 6-month-long state government shutdown, Uber had the gall to send lobbyists to Harrisburg and offer to pay the sales tax, but only in exchange for our state legislators passing a law that officially misclassifies their drivers as self-employed, which would allow Uber to deny their drivers essential employee benefits. All of this after the PA Supreme Court explicitly ruled that the drivers were not self-employed and were therefore entitled to these essential benefits. It's just another example of how corporations think that they own the place, because for years, they pretty much have. They've been allowed to send these high-paid lobbyists to Harrisburg and write generous campaign checks. And in exchange, our state leaders have pretty much done their bidding. But enough is enough. We need to send a message to these corporations that they do not own us. And in particular, I have a message for Uber. If we pass a law that requires you to pay the sales tax, you will obey the law and pay that tax while also obeying the law and providing employee benefits to your employees. This is no longer a negotiation. But I digress, because there's another way that the state could fund public transit, and it wouldn't even cost them a penny. And it's by ending something called state preemption. Because the most cynically cruel aspect of this whole thing is that not only does our state refuse to fund public transit, they also explicitly prohibit our counties and municipalities from funding it themselves through this preemption. Basically, we're not allowed to come up with the funding ourselves. We have to wait for the state to give it to us. But the one thing that is clear to me after all of this is that we are never going to get public transit funding with the state leaders that we have right now. Because for many years, we actually had a budget surplus in Pennsylvania. When Act 89 expired in 2022, we had billions of dollars of a surplus, and they still didn't fund public transit. They are never going to fund it. The only way we are going to get a functional transit system is if we elect new leaders who are committed to our communities and committed to the idea that we deserve a way to get to work and to school and to the grocery store. And that is a big reason why I'm running. So thanks for listening.